Nate hunched over his phone in the dim light of his studio apartment, the hum of the Oregon rain tapping against the window, a steady rhythm to his quiet life. At 28, he'd built a cocoon in this small coastal town, his days shelving books at the library, his nights fading into podcasts and instant noodles. He swiped through Grindr, a rare impulse after months of solitude, his thumb hesitating over profiles that felt too loud, too bold for his guarded heart. Then a match pinged, a jolt in the stillness. Jamie, 25, with a bio that read coffee addict, bad at texting back, good at laughing. Nate's lips twitched, a flicker of warmth, and he typed a shy, "Hey." Jamie replied fast, his words easy, teasing, pulling Nate into a chat that stretched past midnight, the first time in years he'd felt a spark instead of a shadow. Their banter flowed, a dance of wit and warmth, Jamie's messages painting a picture, a barista with a crooked smile, a love for old vinyl records, a knack for making Nate chuckle over dumb puns. "Send me a pic?" Jamie asked, casual, and Nate froze, his reflection in the screen a reminder of the boy he'd buried scrawny, scared, the kid who'd cried in a high school bathroom. He snapped a blurry selfie, sent it, heart pounding, and waited. Jamie's reply came, a photo loading slow on Nate's shaky Wi-Fi. Dark hair, hazel eyes, a grin that lit up the frame. Nate stared, his breath catching, not at the charm but at the bone-deep familiarity. That jawline, that tilt of the head, he'd seen it before, not on a lover but on a tormentor. Jamie was Paul's brother. Paul, the name clawed up from a decade ago, a ghost Nate thought he'd outrun. At 17, Paul had ruled their high school like a king, his fists and sneers a daily terror. Nate had been his favorite target, the quiet kid with thrift store jeans, too small to fight back. The worst day burned bright, Paul cornering him in the bathroom, forcing him to strip his shirt while friends laughed, filming it all on a flip phone, the clip spreading until Nate's shame was a schoolyard anthem. Paul had graduated, moved on, but the video lingered in Nate's nightmares, a leash on his life. Now here was Jamie, Paul's younger brother, chatting like they were old friends, oblivious to the history tying Nate to his family's shadow. Nate's phone buzzed, Jamie's next message glowing. "You're cute, library guy. Meet up sometime." His stomach flipped, a mix of dread and longing. Jamie didn't know, couldn't know, the boy he'd matched with was the one his brother had broken. Nate's finger hovered over the delete button, the safe choice, the one that'd keep Paul's ghost buried. But Jamie's words lingered, a lifeline in the dark. "You seem real, Nate. I like that." He'd spent 10 years hiding, shrinking, letting Paul's cruelty define him. What if Jamie was different? What if this was a chance to feel something beyond fear? He typed back, "Yeah, let's meet," his hands trembling, the rain louder now, a drumbeat to a choice he couldn't unmake. Ever found hope in a place you feared? Tell us below. We're here for it. If Nate's leap hooks you, hit like, share this, and subscribe to Hard Stories. Love's coming, but so is trouble. Don't miss it. Nate adjusted his jacket in the cracked mirror of his studio apartment, the Oregon drizzle streaking the window behind him, his heart thudding louder than the raindrops as he prepared to meet Jamie. At 28, he'd lived small, a librarian tucked away in a coastal town, his life a quiet shield against the echoes of high school humiliation. Jamie's messages had pierced that shield, their late-night chats a lifeline pulling him from the dark. But the truth gnawed at him. Jamie was Paul's brother, Paul the bully who'd filmed his shame and left scars that never faded. He'd agreed to this date, a coffee shop rendezvous, against every instinct screaming to run, because Jamie's laugh over text felt like sunlight, and Nate hadn't felt warm in years. He arrived at Brew and Bean, a cozy hole-in-the-wall with mismatched chairs and the hiss of an espresso machine, his palms sweaty as he scanned the room. Jamie waved from a corner table, his dark hair tousled, his hazel eyes bright, that crooked grin from his photo lighting up the space. "Nate, right?" he said, standing, his voice a melody that eased Nate's nerves. They shook hands, Jamie's grip firm, and sat, the table a tiny island in a sea of chatter. Coffee turned into hours, words flowing like they'd known each other forever. Jamie's tales of spilling lattes at work, Nate's quiet love for dog-eared novels. Laughter spilled out, genuine and unguarded, and Nate felt a knot unravel, a weight lifting he hadn't known he carried. The night deepened, the shop emptying, and Jamie suggested a walk along the pier, the salt air sharp as they strolled under flickering streetlights. "You're different," Jamie said, bumping his shoulder, his smile soft. "Real, not just another swipe." Nate's chest swelled, a warmth spreading he hadn't dared hope for, and when Jamie's hand brushed his, he didn't pull away. They ended up at Jamie's place, a cluttered attic apartment with vinyl records stacked by a turntable, and what started as a hookup melted into something more, hours tangled in sheets. Talking until dawn, Jamie's arm draped over Nate's chest, a safety Nate hadn't known he craved. For the first time in a decade, he wasn't the kid Paul had broken. He was just Nate, seen and wanted. Days turned to weeks, their connection growing roots. Jamie brought light to Nate's gray world movie nights on a sagging couch, morning texts with coffee emojis, quiet walks where words weren't needed. Nate kept Paul buried, a ghost he wouldn't summon, fearing it'd shatter this fragile joy. Jamie didn't push, didn't pry, his ease a balm on Nate's guarded soul. But peace cracked one Saturday at the supermarket, their cart rattling with cereal and beer, Jamie's hand on Nate's back as they laughed over a bad pun. A shadow loomed at the aisle's end. Paul, taller now, broader, his eyes locking onto Nate's with a flicker of recognition. Time slowed, Nate's breath hitching as Paul's gaze slid to Jamie, then back, a smirk curling his lips, cold and knowing. Paul stepped closer, his boots heavy on the tile, his voice a low drawl. Well, didn't expect to see you here." Jamie frowned, oblivious, saying, "Hey, Paul, this is Nate." Paul's smirk widened, his stare pinning Nate like a bug under glass. "Nate, huh? Small world." He didn't say more, just nodded and walked off, his chuckle trailing like a threat. Nate's stomach churned, the past clawing free Paul's laugh in that bathroom, the camera's red light, the shame that followed. Jamie nudged him, asking, "You okay? You look pale." Nate forced a smile, his voice tight. "Yeah, just tired." But his hands shook as they paid, the grocery bags heavy with more than food, Paul's presence a storm cloud gathering fast. Nate walked Jamie home, the rain picking up, soaking his shoes as they parted with a kiss that tasted bittersweet. Alone, he replayed Paul's smirk, the way his eyes had lingered, a predator sizing up prey. He'd risked it all for Jamie, this brightness he'd never known. But Paul's shadow loomed, a reminder that healing came with a price. Nate sank onto his bed, the apartment silent save for the rain, his phone dark with no new messages. He'd found something real, something worth holding. But Paul's face whispered a truth he couldn't shake. The past wasn't gone, and it knew where he lived. Nate sprawled across his threadbare couch, the Oregon rain pounding a frantic tattoo against the single-pane window, the only sound in his small studio apartment besides the hum of a dying fridge. At 28, he'd woven a fragile peace with Jamie, their weeks together a tapestry of laughter, late-night talks, and a closeness that softened the jagged edges of his lonely existence. The library job kept him steady, the coastal town a quiet hideaway, but Paul's smirk from the supermarket lingered, a dark thread unraveling his calm. He'd brushed it off, buried it deep, telling himself it was a fluke, a ghost that wouldn't stir. His phone glowed on the cushion, Jamie's last text. "Miss you, library guy," warming him until a new buzz jolted him upright, a number he didn't know slicing through the night. "I still have that clip." His breath hitched, his fingers fumbling as he unlocked the screen, the next message spilling out like poison. "You remember, don't you, that day you bawled in the bathroom begging me to stop while I tore your shirt off in front of everyone? One tap, Nate, and this town sees it all. Stay away from Jamie." Paul's words burned into his retinas, a name he'd locked away, a bully who'd ruled his high school years with a cruel fist. At 17, Paul had cornered him in the boys' bathroom, his buddies cackling as they filmed, ripping Nate's shirt to shreds, the flip phone's red light a spotlight on his humiliation. The clip had spread, a virus of shame that chased him through halls, into nightmares, a decade of silence he'd thought was safe. Paul had kept it, a trophy, and now he waved it like a loaded gun. Nate's chest seized, his phone clattering to the floor, the apartment shrinking as the past roared back. He saw it all, the cold tiles under his knees, Paul's sneer, the laughter ringing in his ears, his voice cracking as he pleaded, "Stop, please," while hands pinned him down. The video had haunted him, a shadow he had fled to this town to escape, believing it was gone, erased with Paul's graduation, a relic of a tormentor's youth. But it lived, preserved in Paul's grip, and now it threatened Jamie, the one bright spot Nate had dared to hold. He stumbled to his feet, pacing the creaking floorboards, his breath ragged, the rain a deafening roar outside, drowning his gasps as panic clawed up his spine. He grabbed the phone again, rereading the texts, each word a hammer to his fragile world. "One tap," Paul wrote, and Nate's mind spun, picturing it. The clip online, his co-workers' whispers at the library, the townsfolk's stares, Jamie's hazel eyes dimming with pity or revulsion. His palms slicked with the sweat, his knees buckled, and he sank against the wall, curling into himself, the couch a distant island he couldn't reach. 10 years of hiding, rebuilding, shrinking from the world, and Paul still held the leash, yanking it now to choke the life Nate had dared to build with Jamie. His fingers hovered over the screen block, the number, delete it, run. But fear pinned him, a prisoner to a past he couldn't unmake. Jamie's call came later, his voice a lifeline through the haze. "Hey, you good? You've been off since dinner." Nate's throat locked, his lie slipping out like a reflex. "Yeah, just swamped at work, long shift." Jamie chuckled, warm and unaware, saying, "Rest up, I'll bring toffee tomorrow." The call ended, Nate's hand trembling as he set the phone down, guilt twisting his gut. He couldn't tell Jamie not yet, maybe never, because Jamie was hope, a melody in his gray days, and Paul was a storm, a darkness Nate couldn't let touch him. He crawled into bed, the sheets cold against his skin, the rain relentless outside, Paul's threat looping in his skull like a broken record, keeping sleep at bay with flashes of that bathroom, the shame, the terror. Dawn crept in, gray and heavy, the rain a steady drip as Nate hauled himself to the library, his hands unsteady shelving books, his eyes hollow in the staff room mirror. Jamie texted, "Coffee at noon?" And Nate replied, "Sounds great," his fingers numb, his smile a brittle mask. Paul's message hung over him, a guillotine poised to fall, shattering the peace he'd clung to with Jamie. He'd lied to shield it, to keep Jamie's lie close, but the truth gnawed at him, a beast he couldn't cage forever. The clip was real, Paul's power was real, and Nate's silence was a thread fraying fast. He slid a novel onto the shelf, its spine creaking, and caught his reflection in the glass, a ghost of that 17-year-old boy, trapped again, wondering how long he could run before the past caught up. Nate shuffled through the library stacks, the scent of old paper a faint comfort against the storm brewing in his chest, his hands trembling as he slid books into place. At 28, he'd clung to Jamie like a lifeline, their weeks together a fragile refuge from a past Paul had resurrected with a single text. The message, "One tap and this town sees it," burned behind his eyes, a threat to unleash that high school video, to strip him bare again. He'd lied to Jamie, kept the darkness at bay, but Paul wasn't done. 2 days after the first text, Nate spotted him outside the library, leaning against a lamppost, his broad frame unmistakable, his smirk a blade in the dusk. Paul didn't approach, just watched, a predator circling, and Nate's stomach knotted, the peace he'd found with Jamie slipping through his fingers. The threats escalated, relentless as the Oregon rain. Another message buzzed late at night, Paul's words sharper now. "You think you're safe with Jamie? Cut it off, or I post the clip, and I'll make sure everyone knows my pure little brother's screwing a loser like you." Nate's breath caught, his phone trembling in his grip, the walls of his apartment closing in. Paul wasn't just after him, he'd dragged Jamie down too, taint the one person who'd seen Nate beyond his scars. He paced, the floor creaking under his weight, his mind a whirl of panic and shame. Paul's shadow followed them, lurking near Jamie's coffee shop, trailing their walks along the pier, a ghost Nate couldn't shake, his presence a tightening noose. Jamie noticed, his hazel eyes narrowing over breakfast one morning, pancakes cooling untouched on their plates. "You're jumpy," he said, his voice soft but firm, his hand reaching for Nate's. What's going on? You've been off since the supermarket. Nate's throat tightened, Paul's latest text flashing in his mind, a warning to end it or lose everything. He forced a smile, his voice thin. Just tired. Work's been rough. Jamie frowned, unconvinced, his fingers lingering on Nate's wrist, a quiet plea for truth. Nate pulled back, the lie a wall he couldn't climb, fear choking him silent. He couldn't lose Jamie, not to Paul, not to the past, but living this love under a guillotine wasn't living at all. The breaking point came a week later. The rain, a steady drum as they curled up in Jamie's attic apartment, vinyl spinning low on the turntable. Nate's phone buzzed. Paul's name a dagger on the screen. Time's up, say goodbye, or I hit send. He flinched, dropping the phone, his breath ragged as Jamie turned, concern sharpening his gaze. Nate, what the hell? Jamie grabbed it, the message glowing stark, and Nate's heart stopped, his hand scrambling to snatch it back. It's nothing, he stammered, but Jamie held firm, reading, his face hardening with every word. Paul, he said, voice rising, what clip? What's he talking about? Nate crumpled, the dam breaking, and the truth spilled out. Paul's bullying, the bathroom, the video, the threats, a decade of shame laid bare. Jamie's eyes blazed, not with disgust, but fury, his fists clenching as Nate finished, voice breaking. He's blackmailing me to leave you. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want this to touch us. Jamie stood, pacing, his breath sharp. That bastard, he spat, grabbing his jacket. He doesn't get to do this. Nate lunged, pleading, don't, he'll ruin us both. But Jamie shook him off, storming out into the rain, his steps pounding toward Paul's place across town. Nate followed, soaked and desperate, catching up as Jamie banged on Paul's door. Paul opened it, smirking, arms crossed, but Jamie shoved forward, voice thundering. You don't control me or him. With your sick games, you're done. Paul laughed, low and cold. Try me, little brother. One click, and it's over. Nate stood frozen, the rain plastering his hair, Jamie's rage a shield he hadn't expected. Paul's eyes locked on his, that old cruelty glinting, and Nate saw it. The bully hadn't changed, only the stakes had. Jamie turned, grabbing Nate's hand, pulling him back into the night, his voice fierce. We're not running. But Paul's laugh followed, a promise of destruction, and Nate's heart sank. Jamie hadn't left him, hadn't flinched, but the fight wasn't over. Love wasn't love if it lived in fear, and Nate knew he couldn't hide anymore, not from Paul, not from himself. The rain washed over them, a baptism of defiance, but Paul's threat loomed, a storm they'd have to face together or lose everything too. Nate stood in his cramped studio apartment, the Oregon rain a soft patter against the window, his laptop open on the coffee table, the cursor blinking over a blank post. At 28, he'd faced Paul's threats head-on with Jamie by his side. Their confrontation in the rain, a spark that refused to die. Paul's promise, one click and it's over, had haunted him. The video of his high school humiliation, a blade poised to cut. But Jamie's fury had lit a fire in Nate, a resolve he'd never known. He typed, fingers steady now, the words spilling out. 10 years ago, Paul bullied me, filmed me crying in a bathroom, shirtless and broken. He's held that clip over me, threatening to ruin me for loving his brother, Jamie. I'm done hiding. If you've ever carried fear like this, you're not alone. I'm not that kid anymore. He hit post, his breath catching, the screen glowing with a truth he'd buried too long. The response roared in overnight, his words rippling across the small coastal town and beyond. Comments flooded, strangers sharing their own scars, friends from the library pledging support, a chorus of voices echoing his pain. By morning it went viral, picked up by a local news blog, then a Portland station. The headline bold, man confronts bully's decade-long blackmail. The LGBTQ+ community rallied, hashtags like not that kid trending, old classmates messaging apologies for their silence back then. Nate watched, stunned, as his shame turned to strength, the clip's power fading with every share. Jamie sat beside him, scrolling, his grin wide. You did it, he said, squeezing Nate's hand, and for once, Nate believed it. Paul's reckoning came swift. The news hit his employer, a lumber company up the coast, and by noon, a coworker tipped off the station. Paul was fired, the company citing conduct unbecoming after his threats surfaced. Whispers spread through town, Paul's smirk replaced by a scowl as he ducked from stairs at the gas station. Jamie moved out that week, his bags piling into Nate's apartment, their lives tangling deeper, a quiet defiance against Paul's shadow. They cooked dinner together, the rain a gentle backdrop, Jamie's laugh filling the space where fear once lived. Nate felt it, a shift, a lightness, the past losing its grip as they built something new, brick by brick. The story didn't end online. A counselor from Nate's old high school called, asking him to speak at a support group for LGBTQ+ teens facing bullying. He agreed, nerves jangling, as he stood before a room of wide-eyed kids in a community center, Jamie in the back, his anchor. "I was you," Nate began, voice steady, the rain streaking the windows behind him. "Paul made me feel worthless, small, and for years I believed it. He threatened to ruin me again, but I stopped running. I stood up, not just for me, but for us. I used to fear being seen. Now I'm here because I chose to live without that fear." The room clapped, some kids crying, others nodding, and Nate stepped down, his chest full, not with dread, but pride. Weeks later, he walked the pier with Jamie, their hands laced tight, the ocean breeze cool against their faces. Paul faded, a footnote in a town that had turned its back on him, his threats empty now, his power broken. Nate glanced at Jamie, his crooked smile a beacon, and knew he'd won, not just against Paul, but for himself. The video, once a chain, was a memory he'd outgrown, its sting dulled by a love that refused to bend. He wasn't that kid anymore, not the one who'd begged in a bathroom, but a man who'd claimed his voice, his life, his heart. The rain had stopped, the sky clear, and Nate stood tall, free at last. Who helped you rise above fear? Tell us below, we're listening. If Nate's stand moves you, please like, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Heart Stories. Stay with us, let's keep these tales of triumph alive together.